The fish we have here in Rhode Island, the ones we catch and eat, they differ greatly from one another, each one having their own essence, some underlying quality that helps define them. Striped bass are different from American John Dory, which are different from fluke. The differences are in taste and texture, as well as how the fish are caught and sold, how the markets work to move it. Take the whiting, one of my favorites. I saw my first whiting sometime in my early 20s while working on a Point Judith fishing boat. A single whiting lying on deck likely failed to impress me much, but millions of them certainly did. When you work on a whiting boat, you become saturated with these fish. They leak into your mind, and often when you close your eyes, all you see are whitings swimming in your head. This is not an artisanal fishery of skiffs and hand lines, a few fish pots. It's about tonnage, weight. Whiting are cousins to the codfish. And like codfish, they spend a good amount of time near bottom, grubbing on anything that'll fit into their mouths. But they are not a speedy fish, nothing like a mackerel or a bluefish. In the fish world, to have speed is to have lots of red muscle. Whiting have virtually none. Their meat is white and flaky and mild. It has a soft texture that dissolves in the mouth. Since at least the 1930s, whiting have been an important fishery resource for Rhode Island. We were known, and still are known, as a top whiting hub. But other New England ports have also played big roles, notably Boston and Gloucester, and more recently, New Bedford. Within Rhode Island, most of the whiting landings have come across the docks in Point Judith. There has been a strong run of inshore whiting around Point Judith for as long as Rhode Island boats have gone out fishing. The whiting boats go out in the morning and land their catch that afternoon, from springtime to the winter. This inshore fishery has been a mainstay for many fishermen in the fleet. If you talk to an older fisherman in their 70s, 80s, or 90s, they all speak fondly of catching inshore whiting, talking about the old tows and the old whiting grounds around Block Island and the shores of Narragansett. And the boats today still make those same tows on the old whiting grounds, bringing the dayboat fish back to market. There's a tradition to it. But there is also an offshore whiting fishery which operates year-round. This was where I saw my first whiting trip, well offshore from Nantucket. These offshore boats fish some of the worst weather New England has to offer. It's truly extraordinary the gales the whiting boats endure as they try and play the market to their advantage, being out when everyone else is tied to the dock. On average, Rhode Island catches between 6 and 8 million pounds of whiting a year. Peak landings were in the 80s and 90s, where Rhode Island boats landed between 15 and 19 million pounds a year. That's a lot of fish through the years, a lot of consumption. But these fish are not easy to sell. The whiting market is temperamental, gets easily flooded by product. When that happens, the price falls. But it also isn't as simple as supply and demand. Ask any whiting buyer, and he or she will tell you that whiting are one of the toughest fish to price. Wild fluctuations from $1.50 a pound to 12 cents a pound are commonplace. No one really ever understands the whiting market. They just live it every day of the year. As one whiting buyer told me, you have to be in it all the time to make any money. So who buys all this fish? Who buys all this weight? To me, this is the interesting side of the story. The fish almost disappear into American foodways. They get caught, they get trucked out. They get broken down into smaller and smaller amounts, divvied up by fish peddlers and vendors. Whiting are an urban fish. That's where the bulk of them gets eaten. New York, Boston, Toronto, Philly, Baltimore, to name a few. I picture them being eaten, fried whole, in chairless restaurants, as street food. Though I don't know. I've never seen a whiting being eaten in a city before. That's the mystery to it. All the people I've talked to, no one really knows. Some have told me that the Italians and Portuguese eat them, that Jewish people have a favorite way of cooking them, that African Americans eat them, Greeks, Hispanics, One buyer I spoke with said the Chinese and Koreans are hugely important in the consumption of whiting. One thing is obvious to me. If the New England whiting industry were to rely on white Americans for their profits, the industry would be sunk by Friday. Whiting live between two food worlds. They are not part of the industrial food system of pork or potato chips or salmon. They are not part of cruise ships, hotels, or casinos, not part of the major restaurant chains. But on the other end, they are not part of the craft culture of hook to table, the ever-present movement of know everything about your food. I'm sure your whiting eater in New York or Toronto cares little about the fisherman who caught it or where. It's food. It's daily eating. The eater may choose whiting one day, tilapia the next, scup after that. What is cheap? What is available? And how is all this whiting eaten? Does each culture use it in different ways? Is it fried? Is it baked with onions and tomato? Is the whiting mashed up into fish balls and served in soups? I know some think there is no better fish than smoked whiting. I like mine very simple. A fish fresh from the sea, pan-seared with hot oil and butter, some salt, some pepper. The bone just peels away. One of the fears, and not just of whiting, but of any fish that is generally eaten whole, is how each generation is different from the last. That the tradition of the way we eat is not static, but changes. My wife grew up eating whole sardines, a traditional Portuguese food. Her fingers work adeptly at removing the meat from bone. When I first saw her eat a whole whiting, it was like she had done it from birth. But this is changing. I hear the youth of more and more fish-eating cultures are not eating in ways their parents or grandparents did. Filet is what so many people want, boneless. People want what is easy, value-added meals, ready to go. This, to me, is the ultimate conflict of the whiting market. Butterfish and scup, too. These markets need the fish eaters. They need those who are in the habit of eating fish.